Okay, so it looks like we're live. So hi everyone, welcome to this React Europe Hangout with Bill, who is the author of React Group Form. He will give a presentation on it. So hi Bill, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks.
So I will let you share your slide, and then we will take question from the audience.
All right, cool, thanks. I actually don't have slides, but I can talk through this library anyhow. Hi guys, my name is Bill. I'm the author of React Hook Form. Our form validation library has been going on for a year. So far, it's doing pretty well. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about the motivation and the idea behind building this new form validation library, going through some of the API and features by using this library, and finally going through a demo at the very end. So let's jump into it. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with this library,
Wait,
so I might.
can you wait a second? I just
Yep.
a little issue with OBS again. Okay, you can go on. Sorry.
Yeah, good. That's fine. So I'm not sure how familiar everyone with this library. So I'm gonna start with playing a short video, just give you a bit of sense of how this library actually works. So just as the name sounds, the library is completely based on custom hook. So we don't really need to import any wrapper component to build a form. You can easily just invoke the custom hook method and getting exposed with methods, things like register and handle submit. While using register, we can straight away register each input into the custom hook and then invoke with handle submit around you submit function. And voila, you have a form ready to collect user information. And also, one of the important aspect for this library is it doesn't trigger re-render while user actually interact with the form. So you can see in the render counter in here, it still stay as 1 when user interact. And by submitting the form, you're actually getting the final result from the form. So that's a quick overview how this form library works. Now let's talk about some of the goal I would like to achieve by implementing this library. I list our developer experience as the very first important point because I truly care about that. As a dev, I working on form on daily basis, and I understand how important and how simplicity of an intuitive API can really help on dev in terms of productivity and delivery speed. So the API of this whole library is being designed to be simple on the very get-go, and that proves that over the year of time, and the library API hasn't been changed that much, and it still remain the simple and elegant. On top of that, we also building things like form builder around the library where you can actually jump into the website and just quickly building a form on the fly and copy paste to your code editor or your dev environment. Say, for example, if I want to add another age input, I can set that as number, give it a validation rule, and I can straight away creating that individual input. I can even drag around and have the code export in here. I can even actually quickly have a play with a form on the website itself. So that's form builder. We also build a dev tool around this library for the sake of when you're building large and complex form, you want to know a bit of an insight of what's actually being registered, whether the form is get touched, whether the field is dirty. A quick example in here where we have a little form in here, which is basically the form you created before. You can enable dev tool And the moment you hit submit, you can straight away see which fields actually got zero, which got highlighted. And if you're working on a pretty large form application, you can actually either anchor to the particular field that you're actually having trouble with. So that's a dev tool. Like I said, we focus a lot on developer experience, and even I pick up my design skill back. And again, I used to be a UI designer. I designed this website to be as nice and elegant as it can, and have a nice API reference page for dev to dive into the library. The second point I want to make is for this library is getting closer to HTML standard, which is reusing those constraint API. Those things that probably a lot of users, a lot of developers, pretty familiar. Things like require, emit, max. In this library, we basically allow you to use those attributes again, which I think is good to bring back some of the knowledge that you already had with HTML validation to this library. Things like require and patterns, and max, you can all reuse those attributes in this library. And thirdly, it's been light. The library was designed to be light and very get-go, and also because custom hook, we dramatically reduce the amount of code to writing wrapper components. So things actually pretty light to be in this library. The overall size is only 9 kilobytes, which contains multiple custom hook. So if you're only using the main custom hook, which is use form, you will be resulting around 5 kilobytes, and it's totally tree shakeable for this whole package as well. Performance was other very important perspective when I start design this library. Like most of you guys, probably be very familiar building form controlled, which is basically example in here where every time a user interact with the form, actually trigger reconcile with the React behind, which is a kind of good feature when you're building form that requires to be constantly monitoring what user actually typing. But over the year, what I find is often then when you're building form, that you probably don't even need to trigger re-render when user actually interact with the form. And that's what React Hook form came in, that when user actually interact with the form, it doesn't trigger unnecessary render unless you told us so, which I'm gonna show you in the API section later on. So not only just give you better performance, it gives you the options to whether you want to be controlled in a particular field or not. And last but not least, being adaptable. I guess these days for modern form library, everyone is trying to get away with any kind of dependency, and that's kind of the same for React Hook form as well. We don't depend on any other external library. Everything is just sitting in one. So hopefully I'll give you a bit of a good introduction and insight of why this library appealing and become quite a popular among the community. I think these 5 goals driven a lot of these decisions and trend right now in the community. So let's now dive into the whole API design for this library. Like I mentioned before, developer experience means a lot to me, and that can reflect on this API design as well, because the whole library, the entire API sits in one entire page, and there's not a different page you have to go through to dig around. Okay, what should I use? What should I not? Everything is just in here. And let's get into probably the most important custom hook inside this library, which is use form. You're probably going to need to use this on every single form. This custom hook does expose a few configuration as well. Excuse me. And there's a few things that I want to particularly talk about. the first thing I want to talk about is when you invoke use form, you have the option to set the mode. This is purely from a user experience perspective, because over the year, when I work in a small or large team, when we're building form validation, often we find inconsistency while user trigger a validation. Sometimes a developer will set the validation to be triggered on blur or on change where the requirement was not clear. This attribute makes the entire form validation to be aligned. If you set the validation to be on submit, then the only validation will be triggering when user actually hitting the submit button, which means that they actually confirm what they want to be validated. And the revalidation was kicked in with any of the error fields. And the second interesting attribute I would like to talk about is submit focus on error. What this does is, because we actually register each input's reference into the custom hook, what this allowed us to actually automatically focus on the error field straight away. So imagine that you actually have a quite a large form to fill, and everything was correct for what the user actually entered. The only field that I actually have issue was actually outside viewport. And that can be sometimes frustrate to the user if you didn't handle it correctly. So this library would allow you to automatically actually focus on the arrow. So the particular issue of that field can get focused automatically, which is a pretty neat feature. So that's pretty much use form and some of the configuration objects inside. And now let's talk about the first and probably the most important method comes out, this custom hook, which is regist. This regist handle things like register import reference into the custom hooks, shaping the data structure, whether you want to shape into an object or shape into an array, and also allows us to attach validation against it and with the error message. So some users actually also have concern about, okay, what if I don't get hold of the input reference? That's actually not a problem as well, because we can often register and import on the user factor as well. And this actually have an interesting fact that a user actually come up with this really cool example that you can actually build a form almost in a virtual list, which means when you have a form that is extremely large, like 1,000 fields, whatever, you actually don't even have to register the particular input into the custom hook, while you actually register at the user factor level, and which result that you can build some fairly large form and still have a performance experience to the user. So that's a little bit insight about how you're using register method and what's happening behind the scenes. The next API I would like to touch is the watch functionality. This is highly inspired by $.watch from Angular. And that's one of the things that I find is pretty useful, because it gives you the option to decide whether you want to subscribe into a particular field, almost turning an input into a controlled manner. So in the example in here, I can watch this yes field in here, which has got registered. And this means I can conditionally render stuff or constantly listen to what actually the user actually typing into that individual input. So it gives you the flexibility whether you want to watch a particular field or decide to leave it as silent, which allows the user just keep typing without trigger re-render. The other things that's watch. The other interesting. The rest of it is pretty standard, like handle submit, reset, set error, clear errors. Set value is another interesting one. it's a little bit different than the normal kind of a controlled set value where you actually have to trigger re-render. In React hook form, when you set value, it directly inserts update inside the input reference itself, so it doesn't trigger re-render. It only trigger necessary re-render. So we have a little reconcile inside React hook form. Things like when an error actually gets appear, we trigger re-render. When user type and resolve an error, we trigger another re-render. So during that time when user actually try to correct an input, we don't trigger any unnecessary re-render. Get value is another. I've actually heard people raise concern about get values, whether it's going to be expensive to call. So I would like to clear a few things in here, because actually get value is not that expensive to call. The moment we register all the input into the custom hook, we already hold individual reference of each input. So basically, look at it as we just reading an object value by saying e.target.value. So we don't actually do any kind of query inside the React hook form. Reading value is basically accessing an object. So get value from the entire form is actually quite cheap as well. So that's get value. Another things, the next API is trigger validation. This gives you the flexibility whether you want to trigger a validation dependently, or you want to trigger entire form. Example would be like, okay, I want to trigger last name while I click the button, or I want to trigger multiple applications through multiple fields, or I want to trigger the entire form. So that's trigger validation. Form states I guess it's pretty standard. Every form library have a form states where you can read. The only difference is we actually have a thin proxy layer on top where you're reading form state. And this gives us the benefits of, if you actually not listening to say is valid, then we wouldn't need to trigger all the logic or schema validation inside the library. So kind of saving the calculation behind the scenes, also skip or omit all those re-render that needs to be triggered. So this would actually helps you form's performance a little bit better if you're actually not watching any of these form states. So that's pretty much cover what use form have underneath the hook. The next thing I want to talk about is a controller. This was introduced lately on version 4. Before version 4, there was a lot of issue happens. People complains about using external library like React Select and Unt.d and Material UI, and purely because we tend to register the reference input from an external library. But at the same time, a library's implementation is, in terms of forwarding ref, it's inconsistently. Say, for example, React Select doesn't really expose the internal input reference, and Unt.d exposing as another object instead of the actual ref. And Material UI using things like inner input ref rather than ref. So with all these concerns, I'm very lucky that one of the issue was raising in React Select, and the author, Jack Watson, provide this really clever idea to have a collector component, almost like a little wrapper component, but isolating the render inside while collecting the data within the component. Let me show you an example in here. So as you guys would already know, for native imports, it doesn't actually trigger re-render. But what about those external controller components like Material UI, React Select, and Data Picker? You probably would assume that this probably would need to trigger re-render while user actually interact with. But because controller is like almost like little sandbox, it can isolate the re-render inside while still collecting the data. So almost like a little controller will actually have an uncontrolled input inside. So example would be like in here, when I interact with the input, it doesn't actually trigger any re-render. Or I still can collecting the data when I actually doing the submit and attach validation against each input. And also good to bring this up, that controller also respect the mode that you set on the user form level. When does the trigger re-render, it's also respect the custom hooks, the configuration mode that you set. So this solves a large problem with when you're working with external control component, and this is extremely useful for working with React Native as well, because in React Native it doesn't really expose reference as web input does. Like e.target.value probably not going to work for React Native. So controller solve this problem once for all. So that's controller. Next thing I want to talk about is use field array. For some of you guys probably working with field array for a long time and understand what use field array is. For those of you who don't know or never work with field array, it's basically like almost like to-do list where you can add, append, and delete items, which is the API in here. But what difference made is with this custom hook, obviously it's a custom hook that you don't even need to use import external wrapper component around your use field array. And the other thing is it's also built on top of uncontrolled component, or maybe it's good to say like just like native input does. So it only trigger re-render when you're adding or appending items. When user actually interact with the form, it doesn't trigger any re-render. So this is kind of useful when you're actually building a large and complex field array that have logic in between that you might not necessarily want to trigger while user actually interact with, and saving you the time to writing those memorized functions to avoid unnecessary logic to running behind. So that's field array. Next thing I want to talk about is validation schema. I think I got a lot of inspiration from Formic because Formic is the first one I think started using validation. Yes. Yeah, I hear you. Yes. Can I? Oh, can I zoom in a little bit? Oh, sorry. Oh my God, I completely forget about that. Does it looks better now? Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, cool, awesome. So validation schema is I got a lot of inspiration from Formic because they are the first one to actually implement validation schema. And funny enough, that was actually the first issue that people, a feature of request that people request on the GitHub, that is easy to actually support validation schema. Turned out it's actually pretty easy for a React hook form to implement validation schema. All you have to do is just basically register all your input through the ref or use a controller, and then you have a schema on the top of the field form, and then setting up the user form as a configuration data. But then a few months later, people start to question about, all right, what about other schema validation library like Joe and Superstrict? And so I was like, this is probably not maintainable if I keep introducing more logic inside the library, and the bundle size would be increased a lot. So that's why I made a validation resolver, which allow you to use any type of validation library, or perhaps you can write your own validation schema as well. And that solves a lot of problem when people want to have other validation schema other than Yup. Just quickly show example in here. This is the validation schema that are using Joe. And all you have to do is writing this little bit piece of logic where you return whether the form actually, oops, make it a little bit bigger, whether the form actually have error or it's actually a valid form. And just simple as that, and we can easily support any other validation libraries. I don't know why it's not working. Hold on. That should work. Yes, it works. So that's validation schema and validation resolver. I think that's pretty much cover some of the core API and functionality behind this library. Now let me dive into a live example and go through some of the exercise so you would understand better. In this code sandbox, I have already installed React Hook form. So let's start with building import the custom hook. React Hook form. Next thing, we probably want to build a little form inside and have a couple inputs. I think I can just, oops. Sorry, can't type when I'm doing a live demo. Also, maybe we should just give a little bit break between each input. Cool. Let's give a bit of placeholder so we know which field that is. Oh, feel free to actually open up a code sandbox and do this together with me if you have a dual monitor. First name, last name, and let's give that a page. The next thing you want to do is always give a unique name because that's how we identify each input inside a custom hook. First name. Page. So now you got a form running, and then give it a submit button. This is just a typical a native form. If you're building control, then you probably would actually set initial state, give it a value, give it a handle submit, and do all of that. But in React Hook form, we don't have to. Let's get the out of this custom hook. By register all this input, all you have to do is just set the register on top of ref attributes. Oops. Now 3 of these fields already got at register inside the custom hook. The next thing we want to do, we want to give it a handle submit in collecting the data. So we want to do on submit, give it a callback. Oops. Let's read the output as well. Using the handle submit wrapper around your on submit function. All right, finger crossed. I think this should work. Cool. Just like that, we already started collecting the data out of the form. Actually, let's give this type number because it's just supposed to be a number field. So next thing we want to do, we want to apply some validation. And apply validation, like I talked about in the API page before, it's actually very simple. You can straight away attach validation to a register function. So I can just set that to be true. Oops. Give them all true. So now all of these fields are actually required. And now is a good time to showcase the autofocus functionality. The moment you hit the submit button, it will straight away focus on the arrow field, and then you can continue going to fill in the form. And we can even do more in terms of validation. We can say minimum to be 18, and then if you try to input 2, then it will be invalid input. So hopefully I'll give you a little bit of idea of how you actually writing a field with just using the register method and handle submit. Obviously, you can access all the arrows, various arrows object. So you can turn out, you can print different arrow message, or you can even actually embedding the arrow message inside. So say for example, this is required field. If we quickly console log the arrow object, oops. So we can actually see the arrow object, and it does attach with the arrow message inside the arrow objects as well. Cool. So the next thing I probably want to showcase is use field array, which some of you probably never going to use it, but if you are actually building some kind of use field array, it's probably a good chance to demonstrate that. Like the same custom hook you want to invoke, and then you are getting other attributes like fields, append. We're just going to use fields and appends in here. The next thing we want to do, we want to hook this up with control and give it a unique name. Let's give it a, say, pets. Cool. So next step, we want to map those fields. And, we want to return an input. Let's give it a name as, it's important actually to give a unique name. So with user field array, you probably want to give an index inside the input name. So example would be pets index. Cool. Also, it's important to give it a key as well. In here, we want to give field ID to each of the key. And next, we want to give a button so we can adding more items as we go. So let's call that pinned. Oops, not on board. I'll click. Pinned. Cool. Let's give it a dot name in here as well. Finger cross. Hopefully this works. Don't mind the layout. Okay. Oh, sorry. I forgot to give it a type equal button. So if you don't give a type as a button, it would treat as a submit button. Let's try this out. Actually, give it a placeholder as well, so we know which field that is. Placeholder. Cool. Cool. It's working. Nice. Let's give it some name and attributes. See if that works. Oh, that's an error. 18 mask. Sorry. Oh, it's not working. Oh, sorry. I forgot to register all these inputs. That's my bad. And you know what? Let's give it a required as well. So, cool. Now, if we adding few items in here, we hit the submit button, it will jump to the first name, last name. And if I give it a 7, it should jump into that field and then change to 19, submit it again. It will jump into the first field array that is missing value. Then I can give some real name in here. P A G E. So if I submit again, it automatically focus and hit the submit button. We're getting the whole field array out of this form. So I think I'm gonna wrap up in here. Hopefully I give you a kind of foundation idea of why this library is emerging and why people find it's easy to build. And finally, I hope this demo showcase how you can easily build a form without have to worry about things like handle submit change, handle change, attach a value, give an initial state. All of this line can be saved while implementing in this library, and things can be actually pretty straightforward while for you to building form. So thanks. I'm gonna wrap this up. Also, thanks Patrick for giving me this opportunity to have a talk about this form validation library. Thanks, guys.
So let's see if you have any questions.
Yeah, sure.
Let me check. You can join us on the chat if you want to.
Yeah.
I will send the URL here. So, how long have you been working on this library for?
A little bit more than 1 year now. I think 1 year and 1 month. Pretty good.
Cool.
I work on that pretty much every single day.
Yeah,
Where
I've
did you
been
send the link?
on YouTube comments. Oh, someone is asking something. How would you manage form state update from outside the form? Imagine a real-time form that is refetching every second and gets updated with the new value. Something like enable reinitialize in formake. Did you get that?
Yes.
Did you get that?
I didn't get that. Where is the YouTube link? Sorry, I should go to the YouTube link. Just give me a second. Yeah. Yeah, that's we have the API. Oh, I get that now. So we have this reset API, which allow you to reset the entire form. You can basically call get value and get the entire form value, and then just reset those values that is just coming from the API. So we have this kind of question being asked a lot. So this API actually solved the problem for us. Or you can actually set the individual field level with set value as well.
Okay.
If that's a question.
Does that answer your question, Jonas? Well, there's a slight delay between us and the stream, so
Yeah.
And so I saw that the library is being used by Redwood.js. Did they get in contact with you before using it?
Oh yeah, awesome. Yes, I think there is another big library using React Hook Form as well. It's a graph library, which is probably one of the reasons why it's getting popular these days. Yeah, and also I think I guess the entry level for this library is fairly low. You probably don't have to be like know React a lot before using this library. That's why people find this is kind of really friendly library to just get their hand on the handling form.
Okay, and have you thought about adding something like a GraphQL integration for validation? Like with GraphQL, you can have automatic validation with the typing. And have you thought about ways to integrate this validation automatically with the React Hook form?
In terms, if you want to validation on key change, then you can just basically set the mode to be unchanged, so it will change. It will change on the fly when user actually typing.
Okay. There's another question
Yeah.
from YouTube. Is there any way to validate some fields on blur and most of them on submit?
Yeah, that you can. Basically, it's actually quite flexible because we have this 2 attribute mode and revalidate mode. If you want a completely custom validation method, then you can basically set this revalidate mode to on blur, on submit, and then you can trigger individual validation with trigger validation API as well. So it's actually quite flexible. that you don't, if you don't want to use the mode, you can completely omit it as well.
Okay. There's another question. Is it possible to integrate it with Xstate?
Oh, totally yes. You can integrate with any state management library.
Okay, makes sense. Let me see if there's any. Is there any other questions?
Oh, how easy it is.
Okay.
It's actually very simple because you don't actually store data inside Xstate until the entire form is valid. So you're probably just only going to do that on submit, or perhaps you want to on change, or if you want to constantly insert the data inside the Xstate. So I don't think there's any trouble with integrate with any external state library. You can easily integrate with Redux as well. It doesn't have any problem. Can we handle submit button state? Yes, we can. So if you take a look the form state, you can easily reading is submitted or is submitting. And like I mentioned before, if you actually not subscribe to those, or if you actually not read these fields, all this extra re-render actually not happening. So it's just matter of whether you want to read those fields or not, or read those form state or not. You tell something more about what? Oh, little state machine. Yes, I can talk about little state machine as well. This is nothing like X state. It's definitely it's like the baby version, or I would say it's very very light and very very simple. I think it's only about 1 kilobytes. It doesn't have all these kind of infinite state management. It's very simple. You tell what the state is going to be updated to. It just do that. Let me just actually go there. And the other good thing about Little State Machine that I did is it's actually persist out of the box. So every time you actually updating your store, it's saved into session storage. I made this actually for work because we used to using Redux. It's great. I'm not saying anything bad about Redux, but when we want to do persist, then we need to install another library, which is kind of tedious. And for things like small like this, it can easily achieve with a little bit of code. So that's why I made this little state machine to basically just acting as a persistent store for you to collecting the data of the form and just store inside session storage. And it's very very simple to use because you skip all these reducer, you skip, you don't even need a dispatch. All you have to do just basically invoking a function, an action, and tell the what's the payload is going to be. It's just going to update the store. So yeah, feel free to check it out. It's actually very easy to use to get your hands on like a little state management library. What's the next thing? Do some live stream on this project. Yeah, to be honest, I'm not very good at the live streaming. I for this talk, I actually prepared a lot, but I still like I still every now and
You
then I
did
find
great
myself
actually,
lost.
son. You did great actually, son.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, I this is actually the first time I'm doing this kind of talk over live stream. So yeah, hopefully I get more chance to do more. Live stream coding. Yeah.
Yeah. Anytime you want, you can do a live coding session if you want to.
Yeah. Thanks.
I was one of the people who was bugging you about Material UI a few months ago because it was
Oh,
working.
did you?
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, I wasn't bugging you. I was just
yes,
asking on the GitHub
yes.
issue, and
That
then a
that
couple of days
oh
later,
that
I think
totally
it was resolved. So
yes.
I was happy.
It totally makes sense, right? Because it's really frustrating because all these external library they all expose ref a little bit differently. Like entity is like exposing an object. The object have like all these method inside, and then you have to drilling all the way down to get the ref. And for material UI, it's not ref, it's input ref. And
Yeah.
with React Select, it's they don't expose reference at all. So luckily, Jack Wilson give me this really good idea. He's like, why don't you just write a little wrapper and acting as like a little collector. And you're just collecting data inside, and you trigger validation according whatever you set on the user form level. And this works great because it also isolates all the re-render inside. So when you're working on a big and complex form, and when you have all these external control inputs, it doesn't trigger re-render at all. It's just like you driving a Tesla car.
Yeah,
It's
it's great.
that silent. Yeah, it's really good.
And another question: when I use a hidden input, do I always need to manually pass the register, the reference, or
If you have an input, a hidden input, yes,
I think
you need to
is this documented? Because I think I saw it on Stack Overflow, but I wasn't sure,
Oh
or on
yeah,
GitHub, I
someone
think.
actually. I think I should actually
Like
document this down because
it's
everything that goes inside the final result of your form, you should register them. Whether you register them in the user factor level, or you can use it register in the controller, or you register on the ref, they have to be registered. Otherwise, it will not go into the final submit.
okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
What's the question? So, do you still work like 9 to 5? Uh, yeah, this is actually a little bit problem for my life right now because I wake up. I need to wake up pretty early in the morning. Literally spend an hour going through all the GitHub issues, and spend my lunchtime going through Spectrons questions and Stack Overflow questions. And at night, I try to work on the code and resolve stuff. But you know what? I'm happy, because it's kind of meaningful thing to do because something I do actually it helps a lot of people, and that gives me, I'm really really passionate about this kind of stuff, even though it does kind of exhaust me in a way, like it sometimes it even kills my weekends. But I think this is meaningful. Like, like when I retire, I look back, at this age, at this time, actually doing something meaningful. I contribute back to the community. So it's good, yeah.
Uh,
To
yeah. Have you tried
But I think
asking
I'm
for maybe the folks from Redwood JS for sponsoring or Netlify or something? Maybe they do.
no, I haven't actually.
Maybe they would be up for it.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully.
I heard they got some funding recently.
Oh, really? Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I haven't asking for any sort of funding, but I'm really glad that there are some really really nice people in the community. They even like drop their own coins for this project. I do really appreciate that because those money are whether they hardly they earn by themselves, and they're willing to take out the money and supporting me. And I really appreciate it. To be honest, I'm more kings for big organization. Okay, drop some money for me to maintain this library. Sometimes I feel like a little bit guilt, like I'm not asking, but I saw people willing to donate that money to me because I feel like, oh shit, well, I don't want to take your money because yeah, your money it should be on yourself. I'm more like keen to get money out of those big organizations, those big corporate that are actually using this
Yeah,
library.
yeah, makes
That
sense.
they should be the one actually contribute a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree. Hopefully, get maybe with Netlify or the big company, they
Yeah,
will be happy to.
I know. Like I really hope they do eventually because
Maybe
a
you
lot
should
of
just
hours.
try to email them, and maybe they will
Yeah,
accept.
maybe.
Sometimes you
Yeah,
just have to.
maybe. Okay. I try.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um.
Cool.
So do you? Yeah. So it looks like we don't have any other questions. Are you? This is the last chance if you want to ask a question to Bill. Okay, it looks like
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think.
yeah. So
And yeah, I think like actually maybe let me just reply on this question. Are you a full-time maintainer of this package? I can tell you, I can promise you that as long as I'm still healthy, as long as I'm still energetic, I'll be still around this library and maintain it. for whatever it takes or how long it takes until that maybe nobody using this library anymore, then I'll probably drop the tool. But for now, I'm still very, very passionate. I think this passion is not gonna go away anytime soon. So yeah, hopefully that answers and hopefully that reduce your hesitation in terms, okay, whether this library is just gonna be, a weekly project. No, 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 no. This library it's been there for more than a year. Like I pretty much commit on it on every single daily basis. So I'm not gonna let go. It's like a little baby to me now. Like, I give a birth to a baby. How can I adopt it, and just drop it? No, no.
Someone is asking, did you build the UI and UX on the site on your own?
Yes, I did it myself. I think if you missed what I said before, I used to be a UI designer. I think I did a UI designer for a couple of years. Then I sick of it because if, in terms of UI design, there's no such thing as a kind of standard. It's like whatever you do, maybe the management level likes and maybe they don't. So I was like, okay, I need to work on something that is a bit more powerful, and then I start to dig into JavaScript, and I found like, oh, this is awesome. I can finally do something that is it's really powerful. It can benefit many, many people. And at the same time, sometimes I can leverage my designer background to build something that is nice and elegant. I even contribute my idea to my company's UI UX
Hmm.
team. So, and I apply some of this kind of principle of design and UX into the site to build a really good experience for us as well, because I cares about, like I said, I cares a lot about the developer experience. So I thought like having a nice website and an elegant website and good documentation, it will help all of us. Even for myself, sometimes I building a form, right? I refer back to the API page. I was like, that's cool. Okay, it's something I did nicely on the website. It pleased my eyes. It's like little eyes candy. Every now and then I see the homepage. So yeah, it's good. Uh, is the doc site? Yeah, the doc site is open source as well. But I tell you what, it's not very nice code inside. To be honest, I did a rush a little bit. It's nothing like the library level. Yeah, because I need to get something out really quickly. So yeah, feel free to contribute if you want to fork it. Like I think someone actually used as a template for another library. I can't remember the library, but yeah, you can use it if you want.
Is it based on Create React App or something or Gatsby?
Yes, it's so the first version is based on Create React App. No library at all, very very plain, but it's very light. It's literally like 20 kilobytes or 20 kilobytes on top of React, so it's about
Oh wow, that's great.
60. Yeah,
Yeah.
nothing else. But then as the sites gets like people start visiting the site, and I realized, oh shit, Create React App is not good enough. I need to have multiple sections. So to a point, I was like deciding whether using Next.js or Gatsby. Then I realized, okay, Gatsby is actually fit for the purpose. So I'm using Gatsby behind the scenes. It's really good. Gatsby is absolutely lovely. Um, yeah, and the other thing actually I want to mention, uh, if you're building a really really simple form, don't use the React hook form because it's not necessary. Or especially don't use any schema validation. They are very heavy. Even though React hook form is like 5 kilobytes, but trust me, uh, it everything adds to the bundle size.
Mhm.
If you're building a really simple page, just a contact us form, don't use any library. Don't use React Hook form. Try to use React Hook form for something is medium or large or something maybe you just want to practice, but don't give that extra 5 kilobytes to your customer. They deserve the quickest and the best website they deserve, because I gave you really a little bit. The other day, I shared a little tweet. It's about bundle size. So if you're using like a modern form library, it's about more than 10 kilobytes. And then you add a schema validation. Schema validation is like 20 kilobytes, believe it or not. So 30K is already there. And then you plus React 40. You give them 70 without even writing a single line of code. You're killing your customer. So if you just have a really plain and context page, just write a native form. It doesn't even need to be controlled. You can just attach some, constraint API require max pattern, type email, type number. You're good to go. Yeah, and accessibility is out of the box as well, because the browser already take care of that. We agree.
No more question,
Yeah.
I think.
So
Yeah.
cool. Awesome. Yeah, that's it.
What were we going to say?
Oh no, nothing. That's it. I just wanna wrap it up and tell people that if you don't have to use this library, you don't have to. I'm not trying to sell this hotcake to you that you should using every form with the React Hook form. No, you should use that if you working with a team, if you're working with a large funnel or multiple page of forms, and then you install a package, because every package is a budget that you have to manage for your project. Cool. I think that's it then. I
Yep.
think that's no more questions.
Okay. Well, thanks, Bill, and thanks everyone for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more cool guests like we had today. There's one last question. It's a bit personal, so feel free to answer or not.
Oh yeah, I'm at my 30, and originally I'm confused. Okay, you can tell by my English is terrible. So I come from China, and I study in Australia for quite a long time. So I arrived in Adelaide. Now I'm working in Sydney. So that's my background.
Okay. How do you like it so far in Australia?
Pretty good. I love it. I mean, I used to absolutely hate it because originally I'm from China. It's a very big city. It's a lot of people, a lot of community. Like you can get access to things very easily, and then you arrive in Adelaide. It's a little city, and it's like a silent hill. It doesn't have any people. And then I moved to Sydney. It's like, okay, it's good balance. Yeah, I think I enjoy a lot now living in Australia. I do miss some stuff in China, but yeah, I'm good. Both lovely countries to me.
Yeah. Okay, so all right, so I think we're done. So I was saying, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It helps us get more content and more cool guests. And if you're interested in React Hook form, we posted the link in the description of the video. Do you have anything else you would like to say, Bill, before we quit?
The last thing is I just really appreciate this opportunity, and thanks very much, Patrick. Yeah,
You're welcome.
that's about it. Yeah,
No problem.
thanks.
Thank you for coming. All right, cheers everyone, and see you next time.
Thanks, guys. Bye, and take care during this special time.
Yeah,
Bye.
take care.